All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this section. In this section, we're going to describe a basic sine and cosine graph. We're going to just focus the rest of this time on sine and cosine, and this particular section is just going to look at the value of A and the value of B. So we're going to just focus this section on the value at A and B and what that actually does to my graph. So I do need to remember what my graph of sine and cosine look like. So remember that my graph of sine starts at 0, goes up to 1, back down to 0, goes to -1, and goes back down to 0. Right, so this is at 90 degrees, this is 180, 270, and then back to 360. So that is sine of x. Cosine of x starts at 1, goes down to 0, goes down to -1, back up to 0, and back up to 1. So you have to remember the original parent functions for sine and cosine. So 90, 180, 270, and 360. And we're going to talk about how a, b, x1, and y1 change what the graph of the parent function looks like. Okay, so amplitude is the absolute value of a. It's the vertical stretch. And the period is the horizontal distance it takes to make one complete cycle. So the amplitude is the absolute value of A. So the amplitude is 1/2. Okay, and what we're doing is we are actually shrinking the graph by a factor of 1/2 because the regular amplitude is 1. Okay. Amplitude is absolute value of A, which is the absolute value of -3. So I am stretching it by a factor. So the amplitude is 3, and it's stretching by a factor of 3. And because it's negative, we call that inverted. So anytime the little a value is negative, it will be an inverted function. What that means is that for this is sine, so instead of starting up here at 1, we would have started at -1 if it's inverted. So it just flipped upside down, kind of. Okay, so the period, okay, so we're going to look at the period. So period is 360 divided by B. So this is 360 divided by, my B is 1/3. So that's 360 times 3, which is 1,080. So my period is 1,080. So that means that along my x-axis, my markings are not 0 to 360. It's actually 0 to 1,080. So that's what's different about that. Okay. And then here, my period is 360 divided by 2, because that's my B value. So then that is 180. That means instead of on my x-axis, for me going from 0 to 360, I'm going 0 to 180 and making still one complete cycle. So that's what's important. Okay. So now if I were to graph one period of sine, the only difference in this is that instead of going to 1, now I'm going up to 2. So this is 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. And I expect you guys to mark your x and y axis. So I'm going up to 2, down to 0, down to -2, back up to 0. And so that is what one period of sine looks like. Okay. Cosine. So my period now, my amplitude is still the same, so it's still 1, but my period is 360 divided by 3, which is 120. So now what I have is I still go up Oops. So I still go up to 1 and go down to -1, but now my markings is normally 90, 180, 270, 360. So 1, oops, I shouldn't do a dot. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have to end at 120 degrees, so halfway between is 60. Halfway between 0 and 60 is 30, so then this makes this 90. So that's how I figure out what my graph looks like, is I start just finding midpoints of my graph. Okay. So now we got to really change it up here. My amplitude is a half. So I'm up at a half and down at a -1/2. My period is 360. Let's get rid of that. 360 divided by 2, which is 180. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Have to go to 180. Halfway between is 90. Halfway between is 45. So then this makes that 135. I'm doing cosine, which normally starts up at my highest point. Because it's a negative here, it's going to be inverted and start at my lowest point. Then go up to 0. Then go up to a half, back down to 0, and back down to -1/2. And so if you notice, all of them all have the same shape, but what's different is what you're labeling as your x-axis and your y-axis. Okay. When I try to find the period of a function, I'm looking at one full cycle, and I'm looking to see, looks like from 0 to 360 degrees is one full cycle for sine. It looks like the amplitude is right about 1.5. So my period is 360 degrees and my amplitude is 3/2. Okay. And yes, you could have done it for cosine, but the amplitude and the period would have been the same. You will get to a point where you're going to start looking at shifting. So moving to the right or to the left. And so you will get different results for vertical movement or horizontal movement. But for the most part, everything that you guys are going to look at, whether you do sine and cosine, it's only when you end up with like tangent and stuff like that that you can change your period. But we don't talk about amplitude. But when you look at cosine and sine, they're going to have the same period and they'll have the same amplitude, regardless of which one you're looking at. Okay, so now we'll look at this one, and I can go here, and this would be an inverted cosine because it looks like an upside down V. And then halfway between 90 and 45. So that's 45 divided by 2. And then that's plus 45. So that's 90 and 45 is 135. So your period is 135 over 2. Because it's 45 plus 45 over 2 is that distance here. And then your amplitude is 2. Okay, and that is it for this lesson.